My name is Doug Priest. I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, April 7th, 1919. My father was a newspaper man there, and his mother lived out in Balboa, California. And we had a 1922 Cunningham car, touring car, which was similar to a Duesenberg. Each one was custom built. And in those days, it was Prohibition, and in the back seat, underneath the carpet of the floorboard, was a white pigskin locker that held 3 bottles of scotch. And also, this 1922 car had an air compressor on it and a length of hose that would reach each tire. And the tires were wire spokes like you have on a bicycle. And my dad used to have to tune those. You would tighten them up, and then you'd hit them with a wrench, and a certain noise would mean that they were the proper tightness. Then we arrived in Balboa. My grandmother was ill and in the hospital and didn't live very long. My dad was an only son, and he inherited the fourplex on 1325 East Central Avenue, which I think today is Balboa Boulevard. This was down on the peninsula in Balboa. And I went to school there at Harbor High, and a Model A bus used to pick us up on the corner from where the house was. And we'd all go up to school and laugh and have a good time. And then about 2 doors from us lived Joshua Heifetz. Joshua Heifetz was a famous violinist, and he had a great big home there and an indoor badminton court there, and he used to let us kids play in there. And when he wasn't here and an orchestra was playing at the Rendezvous Ballroom, why, he would rent the house out to the band. And so all these band people, and these were big name bands here, Harry James and all the big bands of the 40s. I went commercial fishing for a while. And this commercial fishing was for mackerel. Mackerel were very plentiful. We used to fish from Santa Monica down to Dana Point, and we would get about 5 tons of fish a night. And to catch these fish, we had what you call a brailing rack that hooked on the side of the boat, and you stood in there with the hip boots on, and had a pole sticking out from the side of the boat on your left, and that would have a Coleman lantern on there, and you'd have to have it so you could reach it to pump it. And you drop the anchor whenever you found a school of fish, and the anchor would hold you up into the current. You'd have a 1 or 2 knot current going by you. And then you had a 50-gallon drum of ground up anchovies that were used for chum. And that would cloud up the water when you threw a handful in. Because of the current, you'd throw this handful of chum ahead of the light, and then you put this brailing net, which was a hoop with a net on it and a pole, and you dip that in this cloudy water of chum, and you could barely pick up that brailer with all the fish in it, and you'd end up getting about 5 ton of fish a night. And then we'd bring it into the cannery in Newport, which is Western Cannery, which is still there as a restaurant. That's the one that we used to sell to. And that was called the Rhine. And that would just be full of boats, solid boats. And then that whole left side of the Rhine was full of canneries, Franco-American, Van Camp, all the different big canneries. Mackerel was a big business in Newport in the 30s. And they had a whistle that they would blow, and the people would come to work at the cannery. In 1938, we had quite a flood on the Santa Ana River, and we took a day off from school, and I had a Model A coupe at the time, and George Lummel, who lived next to the fun zone, and I went down there with a Model A, and there were chicken coops and telephone poles coming down, and we pulled some of these telephone poles out and sold them for $2 a piece. There were just chicken houses and all sorts of stuff coming down the river. It was quite a sight. In 1938, I worked in a movie with Bernie McNally, who owned McNally's Boat Rentals next to the pavilion. Had sailboats and little U-drive power boats, and he had connections with the movies, and whenever they needed any maritime pictures, why, they always contacted him. And one time they were making a picture, I think this was in 1938, called Spawn of the North. And it was made where the bathhouse was at Corona del Mar, the foot of the jetty, and it was on high pilings, and that was supposed to be an Alaskan cannery, and had nets piled up on deck, and George Raft was the star. And we had to bring a boat down there and sink it for the movie. And the boat that we used to go back and forth on down there was called the Fats Ferry. Joe Beek loaned us that, and that was an original foot ferry that they had at Balboa Island. And it was about as wide as it was long. And that was interesting, making the picture and making believe it was up in Alaska. And the bathhouse was very high on pilings, very, very high. And it was quite widely used in those days. People would have lockers in there. Then we made another movie there that was made just on the other side of the Back Bay Bridge. And we had a tugboat and a barge alongside. And on the barge we had the camera crew and the director. And the boat that was used in there had the Nazi emblem on the bow, and there were spies on there, and they were brought up to the bluffs there, which was assimilated as the Cliffs of Dover. And and Mona's restaurant was up on top of that. And that was all done at night. Then we made another picture with Red Skelton down there on a sailboat. And he was sailing a boat around a pretty good sized sailboat. And then made another one down there where it was a pirate picture, and they had this big dory and a bunch of people in there rowing it who didn't know how to row or anything. So we had a ring put on the keel of the boat by the stem and hooked up to my tug, and the director would tell me from shore of when to pull it out through the waves with the pirates. And so I'd pull it out through the waves here with the pirates here. I don't know what the name of that picture was. A lot of the pictures were made with a different name than what they came out to see in the theater. And they had all sorts of shops in there. Had the merry-go-round, and then out front they had a tour boat that cruised around Newport Harbor with people on it. And I ran that a few times, and you'd have to point out everybody's importance house in Balboa or on the islands as you went around. Then they had a speedboat, and they used to take the people out in the ocean on that. And then there was another speedboat at the pavilion, and that was called the Gallant Lady, and they had an airplane engine in that. And she went so fast with the airplane engine in it that she couldn't go in the harbor because the speed limit was 5 knots. And they had to put a small 4-cylinder engine in it to go in and out of the harbor. And then they'd take the people out. Then back to the Balboa at the harbor master's dock was right between the pavilion and the fun zone at the end of Washington Street. And during Prohibition, that's where the rum runners used to come in, and hearses would back up down there and pick up the whiskey and put them in the hearses because they weren't so apt to being stopped by the police, and they would take the whiskey off to different places. The fun zone was right next to the ferry landing, and there were a lot of interesting places to go there. There was a little restaurant there, and there was a fellow that had chocolate-covered bananas stand that used to sell there. And it was a very popular place, and there was a beach in front, and on Easter week, there wasn't standing room there, it'd be so crowded. Then on down a little ways was the pavilion, which had been there for years. And at the time, a man by the name of Gronsky, or not Gronsky, he was later Lorenzen, Paul Lorenzen. He owned the pavilion and had some sport fishing boats here and had a bowling alley up top. And I worked in the bowling alley and set pins up there for 5 cents a row. We took dancing lessons in 1938 on Little Island, and I can remember learning to do the Balboa hop there, which was very popular at the Rendezvous Ballroom. And the dancing club, as I recall, was right on the corner of the island, and it was about across from where the harbor department is now. And then we would go over to Main Street in Balboa, and it was a very popular nightclub there that we used to go to. It was called the Bamboo Room. And I can remember Pepito the Clown. He rode a bicycle, which was supposed to be the smallest bicycle in the world. And Pepito had a couple of boats there, sport fishing boats, that I ran for him for a while. But the Bamboo Room was a very popular spot there. They had songs and dances in there. And a lot of the movie people used to come in there. And that was one of the favorite spots of Earl Flynn. Earl Flynn had a boat called the Zaka. It was a big sailboat, and I think it's a freighter now down the South Pacific. And it was always fun to see him in there and other people. And it was a great entertaining spot. And then just down the street from there was the Rendezvous Ballroom, which took up a whole block. And that was a beautiful dance hall. And all of your big name dance bands played there. And I was a ticket collector there. Bob Gardner, by the way, also worked there. And we also had the job of whenever the day before they used the dance hall, why, a fellow by the name of Vic Oxelrod and I used to polish the floors. And the way we polished those floors, we had a long plank with a carpet on it, and then a bridle that we could each tie onto us, and each had a pail of some wax and sawdust, and we'd throw that on the floor and drag this big heavy plank and carpet back and forth on the floor. And it was a beautiful dance hall. And in fact, as I got my first Social Security number there. That was in 1936 when Social Security came out. And you had to have a Social Security card in order to get a job. And so I still carry my Social Security card, and the Rendezvous was called the Balboa Amusement Company. And that was a great place. A lot of dances there and a lot of your big name bands. And the bands on their breaks always went next door to Gus's Seashell Cafe and bar, and then you'd all go in there and have a drink. When the war started in World War II, why, the Coast Guard needed a spot in Newport Harbor, so they took over Cagney Island or Collins Island, whichever you want to call it, and they kept their boats all tied up there to go out to sea to rescue whatever needed to be rescued. But they commandeered the island and kept it all through the war. After World War II, when I was working for the Harbor Department, which at that time was down at the end of Washington Street, which is the next street to the Pavilion. And it was just a small building. And I was in a patrol boat one afternoon out towards the entrance, and I got a call that a pilot was parachuting out of his airplane off of the Balboa Pier. And could I go out there? So I went out there, and the plane had gone down and sunk, but the parachute was there, and the pilot was still in it, and he was alive. And so I pulled alongside and got him out of the parachute and put him aboard. And here's a picture showing him getting out of the boat at the harbor department in Newport. He was a pilot firing, I believe it was a TBM, a torpedo bomber from El Toro, which was a large marine airport and training base at that time. After the war, fishing in Newport, sport fishing in Newport was a very popular trend. There were a lot of sport fishing boats. Hatteras there, Higgins are very popular, and they had the Balboa Angling Club there, and the albacore were running well, and we used to get a lot of albacore on the 14-mile bank. We wouldn't have to go any further than that, and now you have to go miles and miles to get an albacore. But the albacore fishing and getting the first albacore was a big event. It always made the headlines in the local paper whenever you caught the first albacore. And one boat that I was on, the ebb tide for the Hattie Auto Transport, they tried for that first albacore all the time. You were allowed to go down as far as the 22nd parallel of latitude, which is just below South Coronado Island. That was the limit. Anything past there would disqualify the fish. So we would get a lot around there. Or sometimes we used to go down there trying to get the first albacore and just go back and forth on the 22nd parallel. And we caught the first albacore several times. And when you come into the Balboa Angling Club to weigh it in, why, the photographers came down there, and it was a big write-up on the paper about catching the albacore, where you caught it. And marlin also was a very big fishing, sport fishing deal. Marlin are strictly for sport. You can't sell the marlin. And also the marlin, you have larger tackle, and there's quite a few people, anglers, who try catching marlin on lighter tackle, which is called 3/6 tackle. Bill Pig, who lives on Balboa Island, he was an excellent light tackle 3/6 fisherman there, and caught quite a few marlin down there. But I don't know how the marlin fishing's fared. I think it's slowed down a lot. One year I was very fortunate. I caught 14 marlin, and I had a charter boat, and I used to run out of the Union Oil dock on Balboa Island there, which was next to the ferry. Eddie Gronendijk owned that, and he was also quite a fisherman. And the harbor was it was a very clean harbor, and at Balboa Island, I can remember. Balboa Island, a lot of that's made from the dredging of whenever they were deepening the harbor. But previous to that, why, the harbor had sandbars all around, and it was very difficult to come in and out of Newport Harbor. There was a little channel that you could wind through. That's before they even had breakwaters. The breakwaters were completed in about 1935. And that really made Newport Harbor a nice harbor, and dredged. And all the dredging was put out in front of the houses, or a lot of the dredging was put out in front of the houses on the Balboa Peninsula. There used to be a short beach there at Balboa Peninsula. Now it's quite a lengthy beach, wide beach going up, and they're wide enough to put another channel out there. On Balboa Island, on the high tides, it used to get flooded. And later on, they put on some bulkheads clear around the island to prevent the flooding, and had valves put on there for draining the water off the island or blocking the valve system from coming onto the water, onto the island. While working at the harbor department, you were paid half by the county and half by the city because you had to go in county area waters that were under the jurisdiction of the county, and then the city had the bulk of the property. While working for the county, you had to be deputized by Sheriff Music in Santa Ana. And there's my old badge there from the harbor department. They're collector's items now. And also, this really didn't have anything to do with the harbor department, but just in regular life there, the Newport and Balboa had a volunteer firefighting system, and not far from the harbor department was the headquarters for the fire department, and the chief was Frank Crocker. And whenever there would be a fire started, why, they'd blow a horn, and then they would have separate blasts after that, and each blast would be a different area of the city. So they could blow the horn, and you'd listen for the blasts, and you know where to go, and you'd meet the fire truck there. And I had a badge there, and it's Engine 6, number 1, Newport Beach Fire Department. And then we come back from that, we'd have to hang the hoses. There was a tower at the fire department. We'd hang the hoses and drain them. But I thought that was an interesting way to do. Now you have pretty big fire departments up there. But I think there was only the one fire department, as I recall, and that was right there by the harbor department, between the harbor department and the pavilion. I don't know what's there now. But also at the harbor department, it was interesting in meeting the different people on the boats and and helping them out or towing them or assisting them. And then the Christmas parades, we would get involved in that. Some of the early parades, they would take some of the floats from the street ends, the public floats, and we would set up a Christmas tree and decorations on there and have people riding on there and tow them around the harbor. And there would be a few boats in it for a while, and then nothing seemed to happen after the war, or shortly after the war. There wasn't, I don't think there was any Christmas parade, because I know I was the only boat with the ebb tide in one Christmas parade. And we used to enjoy going around there and have a party on the boat. And we played records of Christmas carols and Christmas songs. And also you could cut into that with a microphone and greet the folks. Like I recall going by the Scudder home on Balboa Island, and they would be out there waving at us, and we'd wish them a Merry Christmas. And the same thing when we go by the ferry, we'd wish the ferry a Merry Christmas. But those Christmas parades were popular. Later on the Christmas parades on bigger boats went on the Electra, which drew 9 feet of water, and the harbor is dredged mostly to 10 feet of water at low tide. And there were two places that I would go aground and bump. And one of them was up at the Back Bay Bridge. When I'd make the turn there by Swales Landing, I'd bounce on the bottom, just bounce a little bit. And another place was down by Lido Anchorage there, and right there by the corner where some of the yachts were tied up. We would bounce there when we make the turn. But we would go a number of nights on the Christmas parades and party up with the boat. Now, I recall before the war, they had I think it was called the Tournament of Lights. And people would be sitting on the end of Lido Island all over the place seeing these lights. But it got to be too commercial. And they stopped it because some of the commercial companies would go in there and put up big decorations there on the floats and tow them around. And so that stopped. That lasted a few years, though. Then also in the harbor, they used to have some speedboat races. They'd be out between Lido Isle and the Balboa Bay Club. And I'll tell you, there's some pretty fast boats in there, about 40-footers. They're fast boats, and those were interesting. I don't think they have those anymore. We had Bal Week back in the 30s, which was really a lot of fun and a lot of people. The Rendezvous Ballroom was one of the largest ballrooms in the country, and the town was just crowded. People from Los Angeles, Pasadena, mostly college kids or even high school kids would come down there to dance to these big bands. And the whole town of Balboa would just be crowded. During the day, the beaches, you couldn't find a spot on the beach to lie down. There were so many people. And whenever you went in to dance, it cost 10 cents a dance. And at each area, they had a little box, a glass box like you'd get on a streetcar. And in this glass box there, you'd drop your ticket. Well, I had a lot of good friends up at high school that went with me, and some of them used to put some gum on their hand and have one of these tickets on there, and any observer looking would see them put this ticket in. But they didn't know that it was stuck on there and was going to come back out. And so I was pretty popular there at the dance hall there, collecting the tickets. But it was a wonderful situation there with the dances. Everybody loved the dances, and you had to dress up there. You couldn't just be in some old jeans or some attire like that. And it was so crowded that there was only room for the homeowners on Balboa Island, and the city had to put up a line across the bridge coming onto Balboa Island, and you'd have to show them something that you lived on Balboa Island in order to get on Balboa Island. Otherwise, you'd be too crowded. But just people all over, and it was great for business. The Bernie McNally's and Ronnie Valleys, he had another similar boat rental as Bernie's, and they would just be people lined up to get on these boats and go out there. And the same way with the bowling alley at the Pavilion, that would be crowded and very popular, and have tournaments up there. But Bell Week was, I guess it's kind of disappeared. I think they go to different areas now. Now I hear about them, but Balboa was the place to go on Easter week, and you met all your friends. And people had their hot rod cars down there. The hot rod that was very popular was the 1932 Ford, which was called a Model B. And at the latter part of 1932, Ford put out the V8 engine, which was a great improvement. But these Model Bs, 32 Model Bs, are still very popular. You see them around. And they made great hot rods. They were just perfect hot rods. And then they had the 33s and the 34s. The only difference between the 33 and the 34 Ford was on the hood handle. On the 33 Ford, why the hood could be opened by one handle in the center of the base of the hood, and the 34 had one at each end. That was the only difference between them. The rest of the car was just the same. So I guess during the Depression there, they didn't make that many changes on automobiles. I guess that's about it.
That's good.
Thank you very much for listening to me. This is about my life growing up in Newport Beach before World War II and a little bit after World War II. I'm going on 95 years old now and have a lot of fond memories of Newport. I can't think of a better place to grow up. It was great. Thank you so much.